You're listening to Trace Hunt Radio. We explore the darkest chapters of true crime, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and the twisted minds behind them. Follow the blood, chase the clues, uncover the truth. Stay sharp. The hunt begins now.
She never left this room.
The first night it was raining that evening in Paris. The kind of drizzle that painted the cobblestones in silver and made the neon signs bleed into puddles. The 20th arrondissement was far from the romantic postcards. It was quieter, more forgotten, and littered with old buildings that once promised travelers rest and now offered only decay. Sophia Marceau, 24, had just arrived from Lyon. A journalism graduate seeking a job in the capital. She carried a worn leather bag, a second-hand camera, and a note scribbled with directions to Motel Delacroix, a name she had found on a booking site for budget stays. The listing was sparse. One photo, no reviews, no address, just coordinates and a single sentence. Quiet, discreet, ideal for short stays. When the taxi dropped her off, Sophia hesitated. The motel stood alone at the end of a narrow lane. Faded green shutters, chipped yellow paint, and a crooked sign with missing letters, Motel Delacroix. There were no lights in the windows except for one faint glow on the third floor. She entered. The lobby was empty, no desk, no receptionist. Only a rusted service bell and a key already placed on the counter. Room 313. Her name was on a sticky note attached to it. Sophia blinked. She thought of turning back, but the rain was harder now, and her phone had died. She was tired. One night wouldn't hurt. The stairs creaked under her boots. The hallway was narrow and lined with peeling wallpaper. Her room was the last one on the left. Room 313. She hesitated again. Something about the number unsettled her. It didn't look like any of the other doors. The frame was thicker. The doorknob shined as if polished. When she opened the door, the smell hit her sweet, too sweet, like overripe fruit and cheap perfume. The room was dimly lit by a single wall lamp. Everything looked clean but off. The bed was too neatly made, the carpet too smooth. A large mirror faced the bed, and next to it, a small table with an old, dusty hairbrush. Sophia sat on the bed. It creaked but didn't move. The mattress was stiff. She unpacked her things in silence, trying to ignore the way the walls seemed to breathe with her. At midnight, she woke up to a click. She sat upright. The mirror was fogged, though she hadn't showered. The lamp flickered, and somewhere behind the wall or beneath the floor she heard something. A groan. Not mechanical. Human. Low. Muffled. She froze. It repeated. Then a scrape. Like metal on concrete. Sophia stood. She crossed the room and pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. Her breath fogged the mirror as she turned back toward the bed, and that's when she saw it. A shadow behind the mirror. Not her reflection. Someone else. Tall. Still. Watching. She screamed, but no sound came out. The light went out. She ran for the door. Locked. The key was gone. She tried the window sealed shut. She turned back toward the bed, heart pounding, and saw that the mirror was now clean. No shadow. No fog. She stood there for what felt like hours, then crawled back onto the bed, clutching her bag. By morning, room 313 was empty. No trace of Sophia Marceau. No bags. No hair. No fingerprint. No record of her ever checking in. To the city, she simply never arrived. But one thing remained. In the mirror above the bed, written in condensation 5 words, she was a perfect fit. The disappearance of Sophia Marceau never made national headlines. Paris, like many great cities, had long learned to ignore the silent cries that slipped through its alleyways. But in the 20th arrondissement, among the bakers, beggars, and bartenders, people talked. Not in cafes or churches, but in whispers. Whispers that always circled back to room 313. Mrs. Lemoyne, who ran the florist across the street, claimed she once saw a woman check in with luggage and never come out. That was 6 months before Sophia vanished. The florist remembered it because the woman had purchased a single white lily that morning. The kind people left at graves. I thought it was for a funeral, she told a customer once, voice low. Maybe it was. 3 doors down from the motel, an old man named Ren Bissett, retired locksmith and part-time drunk, insisted the walls of Motel Delacroix weren't solid. "I worked on the doors once," he slurred, "back when I still had fingers that didn't shake. Room 313's frame was metal, not wood. Soundproofed, like a vault. But it was Amira Dolly, a Moroccan immigrant working night shifts at a nearby gas station, who heard the truth no one else wanted to say out loud. I used to hear crying," she told investigators years later. "Not always. Just once a month maybe. Always around the same time, just after midnight. A woman's voice. Soft at first, then louder, then screaming, like she was being hurt. Or cut." Amira said she tried calling the motel once. No one answered. She walked over on her break, knocked on the front door. No response. But the window on the 3rd floor opened, just for a second, and someone dropped a piece of paper. It floated down slowly, landing near her feet. Amira picked it up. It was a grocery list. Butter, sugar, plastic sheeting, zip ties, lavender oil. She kept it for years. No fingerprints, and no official report. No one wanted to listen until 5 more tenants vanished, one after another, over the course of a year. Each one arrived alone. Each one booked room 313. Each one disappeared by morning. The police did investigate eventually. 2 uniformed officers visited the property, knocked on the door, and spoke briefly with the landlady, a woman in her 50s, wearing a maroon cardigan and pearls. Her accent was Parisian, her tone polite. She claimed no guest had stayed in room 313 in months. She showed them a spotless guest book. No recent entries. The officers left without pushing further. One of them, Officer Vallon, would later admit the encounter left him uneasy. "She offered us tea," he said. "Her hands never stopped shaking. But her eyes didn't blink once. And yet, without any physical evidence, no missing person reports directly tied to the motel, and no legal reason to pursue, the investigation was dropped." But the whispers grew. By late 2009, Motel Delacroix had gained a reputation not in the media, but online. On obscure travel forums, foreign backpackers began swapping warnings. "Avoid room 313 in Paris, my friend stayed there. I never saw her again. Creepy building. Feels like something's watching you. The owner stares too long. I slept one night and left. Couldn't stop hearing voices." One user uploaded a blurry photo taken across the street, zoomed in. Through the fogged glass of room 313's window, a faint silhouette. A hand, pressed against the inside. Fingers spread, blood on the pane. The thread was deleted 2 days later. But screenshots survived. They always do. And deep in those forums, a pattern was forming, unspoken, but undeniable. Room 313 didn't just take people. It wanted them. When he first reviewed Sophia Marceau's file, what little there was, he was struck by how quickly the case had been closed. No sign of foul play. Voluntary disappearance likely. No leads to pursue. She had no known enemies. No criminal record. No debts. And yet, her last known location, GPS data pulled from a long-dead phone, placed her within 30 meters of Motel Delacroix. Just hours before vanishing, Henry started digging. And what he found was a spreadsheet of ghosts. 13 names, all single, all between the ages of 20 and 40. All visitors to Paris with no local ties. All booked to stay at the same motel. All gone. There were no reports from the motel itself. No complaints. No staff files. In fact, the business had no digital footprint whatsoever. Its registration documents dated back to the early 1980s, and the listed owner, one Colette Vassar, hadn't filed taxes in over a decade. Henry visited the site in person. From the outside, it looked more abandoned than functional. But the front door was unlocked, and once inside, he found something strange. No cameras, no Wi-Fi, no receptionist desk, just a single wall clock that had stopped at 313. The corridors were lined with dusty frames, photographs of strangers, mostly in black and white. One of them caught his eye. A young woman with a bob haircut, staring directly at the lens. Her eyes were wide with terror, though her mouth smiled. The name on the brass plate beneath the photo read, Claire Duval. Year, 1998. There was no record of her ever living in Paris. Henry returned to the precinct and quietly pulled what he could: border entries, last seen reports, even deleted social posts. The victims had arrived via different methods: train, bus, rideshare. But they all booked their stay the same way through a now-defunct website called Guestnest, a startup for minimalist, cash-only accommodations that folded in 2011. When Henry traced the hosting server, he found something chilling. Out of thousands of listings, only one was accessed in the last 5 years. Motel Delacroix, room 313. The pattern was tightening. Every victim had these things in common. Booked for one night only, had no local emergency contacts. All bookings occurred between 8 p.m. and 10 and all arrived within 3 days of the new moon. Henry was skeptical of coincidences, but superstition wasn't part of his training, so he focused on data. What disturbed him most was the timestamps. All digital traces, confirmations, login sessions, last GPS pings ended at exactly 3:13 a.m., every single one. The time the clock inside the motel had stopped. He revisited the florist across the street. Mrs. Lemoyne admitted something odd. "I stopped delivering flowers there years ago." The woman, the landlady, she once ordered black dahlias. I joked they were for a funeral. She just smiled and said, "No, for preservation." Preservation? Henry's hands trembled as he read over the victim files again. One entry stood out. Madeline S., 28, Swiss tourist. Her friend had posted a frantic status days after she vanished. "She told me her room smelled like lavender and chemicals. I told her to leave." She replied with, "Don't worry. The landlady says I'm the perfect kind of quiet." That was the last message I got. Lavender, chemicals, quiet. Henry stared at the phrase, "the perfect kind of quiet." He leaned back in his chair. Something was feeding this pattern, not randomness, selection. There was something deeply wrong with room 313. Detective Henry Morrell knew at the moment he stepped inside, though he had no legal authority to be there. He'd returned to Motel Delacroix under the cover of night, armed not with a warrant, but with a locksmith friend, a flashlight, and a gnawing sense that no official process would ever reveal what was truly hidden behind that door. The hallway was silent, not quiet, silent. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, only the faint sound of dripping water echoing from the pipes. Room 313 sat at the far end of the corridor, its door frame slightly wider than the others, almost imperceptibly so. The numbers on the door had been reattached unevenly, as if removed and reapplied many times. Henry's locksmith friend, Mark, inserted his tools into the lock, only to stop mid-motion. "Strange. This isn't standard. It's reinforced custom." He paused. "Almost like a vault?" After several tense minutes, the lock gave way with a click. The door creaked open. Henry entered first. He expected dust, cobwebs, decay. Instead, the room was pristine. Not just clean, sterile, as though it had been scrubbed down by a professional forensics team. The bed was neatly made with military precision. The carpet had no footprints, no dust on the furniture. The mirror, once fogged in the photo he'd seen online, now sparkled. There was a faint scent of lavender. Henry took a step in, his shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He noticed something peculiar immediately. No signs of wear. No scuff marks by the door. No impressions on the bed. No fingerprints on the bedside table. It was as if no one had ever been here. Mark examined the air vent near the ceiling. "This unit's supposed to be disconnected," he muttered, "but it's humming." Henry climbed onto the chair to check. The vent cover was loose. Behind it, not airflow, but a camera. Wired. Modern. He followed the cable along the wall, behind the mirror. He tapped. The mirror made a hollow sound. With Mark's help, they dismounted it carefully. Behind the glass wasn't drywall. It was a window. A one-way panel looking into a small, adjacent room no more than a meter wide. Hidden. Accessible only from the other side. Inside that chamber, Henry could just make out a small stool, a shelf with several labeled jars, a speaker, a second mirror facing the guest room, and a small red light blinking. "Recording," Mark whispered. "It's like a theater booth." Henry nodded grimly. Except this wasn't for entertainment. It was for observation. Whoever used that chamber watched the occupants of room 313 in real time, studied them. He walked to the closet. It was empty, except for a hatch in the floor. Metal, sealed, with a fingerprint scanner. Mark stared. What kind of motel installs biometric security? Henry didn't answer. He was looking at the hinges. They weren't worn. In fact, they had been oiled recently. He turned to the bathroom. Again, spotless. But when he leaned in to inspect the drain beneath the sink, a smell rose up, faint but distinct. Not sewage, bleach, and blood. He didn't find a single strand of hair. No signs of prior use. No DNA. No tissue. Nothing. Mark muttered what Henry was already thinking. This room, it cleans itself. Or rather, someone cleaned it with obsessive precision every time a guest vanished. Later, when they returned to Mark's van, Henry reviewed the footage from a small hidden camera he'd placed in the vent. It showed the room from the mirror's perspective. 5 hours passed. Nothing. Then movement. The door to the small chamber behind the mirror opened. A woman entered, tall, composed, in a red cardigan. She stood silently in front of the glass, watching the room. Her face was expressionless. And then, slowly, she smiled. Not for the camera, for whoever she thought was in the room. She spoke, but the audio was garbled. Still, Henry caught the phrase, "We're going to make you beautiful." She reached for a switch. The red light on the speaker turned green. And then the video cut. Her name was Colette Vassar, at least according to the faded motel license still registered with the city. But that name led nowhere. No tax records. No ID renewals. No social accounts. Nothing past 2003. As if the woman had vanished from the bureaucratic world entirely, yet was still very much alive, operating in the shadows of a forgotten building. Henry Morrell knew she was the key. The woman in the red cardigan. The one who smiled at no one. The one who cleaned her crime scene better than any forensic team ever could. But who was she really? Henry began piecing her existence together the old-fashioned way through whispers, neighbors, and silence. Mrs. Lemoyne, the florist, offered the first clue. She comes out on Sundays, always wears gloves, always alone, and she never buys anything, just watches people. Wren, the ex-locksmith, remembered her from decades ago. She took over the motel after the last owner died. I installed the locks. She was strange, paid in cash, asked for noise-canceling doors, said she valued peace. And then there was Lucille, a retired maid who'd once cleaned rooms at Motel Delacroix before abruptly quitting. She scared me, Lucille admitted, eyes wide. The way she talked to the guests, like she knew things about them before they spoke. One time, I asked her about room 313. She said, "Some doors are meant to stay closed, even to memory." Henry dug deeper. An old newspaper article from 1978 mentioned a young woman named Colette Vassar, daughter of a respected pathologist. Her father had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, his lab found ransacked, his private notebooks destroyed, his body never recovered. The article noted that Colette was exceptionally gifted in biology, studying cadaver preservation techniques by age 17. Then, nothing. A hard stop in the public record. Henry began to suspect the truth. Colette Vassar was either a stolen identity or a woman who had erased herself. One thing was clear: her obsession with preservation was not new. It was inherited. And then came the breakthrough. A hidden folder on an abandoned hard drive Henry had retrieved from the motel's old back office. Buried beneath layers of dummy files, he found a directory labeled Corky, the French word for flayed. Inside were dozens of photographs. Victims, posed like art. Flayed, arranged, lit under spotlights. Skins pinned like tapestries. Hair braided and preserved in glass jars. Each file had a timestamp. Each matched a known disappearance. And in every photo, there was one constant: a pair of gloved hands, holding the body in place. Henry sat in his car, breathing hard. The level of cruelty wasn't just clinical. It was curated, intentional, ritualistic. And yet no screams had ever been reported. No blood had ever been seen. No body had ever surfaced. Because Colette didn't just kill, she harvested. That night, Henry returned to the precinct and opened a private case file. He titled it, Subject: The Landlady in Red Status. Active threat level. Unclassified extreme behavioral pattern. He attached every name, every pattern, every photo. But before he could submit the report, his screen flickered. An email had appeared in his inbox. No subject, no sender, only one sentence. She only takes what's perfect. Henry stared at the words, chilled. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something behind him in the monitor's reflection. A red cardigan, a woman, standing silently in the hallway outside his office, watching. Detective Henry Morrell didn't go home that night. Not after seeing the woman in the red cardigan outside his office, a presence that vanished before he could open the door, leaving behind only silence and the faintest trace of lavender in the air. Instead, he went back to Motel Delacroix. Not in secret this time. He was done watching. He was ready to be watched. Using an unmarked car and an alias, Henry booked a reservation through a reactivated clone of the now-defunct guestness site. The moment he hit confirm, the page refreshed and his session was logged out. No confirmation, no receipt, just a single sentence. Room 313 awaits. That night, under the cloak of fog, Henry entered the motel once more, this time as its 13th guest. The key was waiting for him on the counter, just like the stories had said. Room 313. Handwritten, slightly smudged. The brass tag was warm to the touch. As he climbed the stairs, he could feel the atmosphere change. It wasn't just quiet, it was pressurized, like the walls were holding their breath. Room 313's door opened easily. Henry stepped inside, eyes scanning every corner. It was identical to the last time. The mirror, the spotless carpet, the faint smell of lavender layered over bleach. But this time, the air felt heavier. He placed his phone on the nightstand, its camera recording. A discreet lapel mic was pinned to his collar, transmitting to a surveillance van 2 blocks away. He sat on the edge of the bed, waited. The mirror fogged slowly. Then, as the clock struck 3:13 a.m., a light clicked on behind the glass. And there she was, the landlady in red, Colette, watching him, as she had done with so many others. But this time, Henry stared back. He stood. She did not flinch. Through the two-way mirror, their eyes met. Henry raised his voice. Colette Vassar, you're under investigation for the disappearance and murder of 13 people. No response. He continued. I know about the chamber. I know about the collection. It ends tonight. Still, she said nothing, but her smile wavered just slightly. Then she pressed a button on her side. The lights in room 313 cut out. Pitch black. The mirror vanished into darkness. Henry fumbled for his flashlight, but it was gone. His phone? Dead. His mic? Static. And from the ceiling above, a faint mechanical whir. He looked up. A small panel had opened, and from it dripped a fine mist. The scent of lavender intensified. He staggered back, covering his mouth with his sleeve. His vision blurred. His balance swayed. He stumbled toward the door, locked. Same as before. Colette had rehearsed this, perfected it. He collapsed to his knees, dizzy, gasping. But Henry had come prepared. Fumbling inside his coat, he pulled out a syringe of fast-acting stimulant designed to override tranquilizers. He jabbed it into his thigh. The pain was sharp, electric. His breath returned. He kicked the door with all his strength. Nothing. Then he remembered the trapdoor under the carpet. He ripped it back. There it was, the biometric lock. No time to guess codes. He reached into his bag, pulled a small explosive charge. Set. Lit. Covered. Boom! The panel blew open with a muffled pop, smoke curling from the hatch. Henry dropped into the darkness below, knees buckling on the landing. He was in the chamber, the real chamber, and for the first time, he saw the truth of what had happened to the others. Rows of jars, shelves of human remains, catalogued, labeled, preserved with obsessive care, portraits painted in human oils, walls lined with skin, and at the far end, a surgical table, with restraints still wet. Henry turned to run and saw her. Colette. No cardigan, no smile, just gloves, scalpel in hand. I knew you were different, she said softly. You're not perfect, but you'll do. Henry froze. Colette stood at the far end of the chamber, poised, expressionless, her silhouette outlined by the soft red glow of the emergency lights. Behind her, the grotesque tableau of jars, bones, and preserved artifacts shimmered like trophies in a serial killer's shrine. She stepped forward, slowly, calmly. The scalpel in her hand gleamed with clinical precision. You should have stayed upstairs, she murmured. Henry backed toward the tunnel entrance. His body still trembled from the tranquilizing mist. The stimulant had bought him time, but his limbs were sluggish and his balance fragile. "I'm not here for theatrics," he rasped. "This ends tonight, Colette." At that, she laughed, soft, measured, almost sad. "Detective, what you fail to understand is that this already ended long ago. You're not the hunter here. You're just the last specimen." In a sudden motion, she threw a switch on the wall. Clang! Metal doors slammed shut behind Henry, sealing off the tunnel entrance. He was trapped. Colette advanced. Henry reached into his coat again, no gun. His standard issue had been confiscated before the infiltration, but he still had a small flare from his emergency kit. He struck it against the wall, a burst of crimson flame. Colette paused, shielding her eyes. He took the opportunity, ran left, deeper into the chamber, past the racks of grotesque remains, past a row of preserved clothing. One jacket caught his eye. It was Sophia Marceau's. He stopped. Right beneath her jacket, pinned to the wall, was a photograph. Not a mugshot, a painting. Her face calm, angelic, immortalized in a canvas labeled, "Perfect Specimen Number 10, the Dreamer." Henry's stomach churned. This wasn't just collection. It was ritual. Every victim had been given a title, a category, a story. He scanned the room and saw the others. Specimen number 1, the believer. Specimen number 2, the runner. 3, the cynic. 4, the orphan. Number 12, the interrogator. Last slot number 13, the watcher sat empty. It had Henry's name written in pencil beneath it. He turned, his footsteps echoed again, but slower this time. No rush. Colette was savoring it. "I let you come here," she whispered from the shadows. "You think you found this place, but I left it open. I needed you to find it." Henry aimed the flare toward her voice. "Why?" She emerged from the dark, arms wide. "Because you're the only one who could finish the story." Before she could get closer, he hurled the flare not at her, but at the shelving. The flame ignited a rack of preserved clothing thick with chemicals. It caught instantly. Woof! Fire spread fast. Colette screamed, not in fear, but rage. "You idiot! You'll destroy everything." "That's the point," Henry growled. He grabbed a fire axe from the emergency cabinet on the wall, swung it toward the trapdoor controls. Sparks. Then hiss! A side panel slid open. An emergency tunnel, disguised within the chamber wall. Henry dashed through it, smoke behind him. Colette gave chase, but the heat from the blaze slowed her. The tunnel wound up through the motel's skeleton, past corroded pipes, faded posters from the 70s, and more hidden rooms filled with forgotten belongings. At the top, he burst out of a rusted utility closet into the back lot of the motel. The sky was pale with dawn. He was free. Henry collapsed onto the pavement, coughing, soaked in sweat. Moments later, backup sirens wailed in the distance. The signal had finally reconnected. But when the police stormed the motel, room 313 was empty. The mirror was intact. The bed was untouched. The scent of lavender gone. The chamber beneath collapsed in the fire. No sign of Colette Vassar. No remains of her collection. Only one thing remained untouched in the ashes: a canvas, untouched by fire. Henry's portrait. The title? Number 13, the one who got away. 2 weeks had passed since the fire consumed room 313 and the horrors buried beneath it. Henry had returned to the central precinct in Paris, but his nights were anything but restful. The investigation had yielded little. No trace of Colette Vassar, no remains from the underground chamber, and no proof of the preserved specimens that haunted his every thought. Worse, the motel was quickly bought and bulldozed by a private developer, one who claimed to have no idea of the structure's dark past. It was as if Colette's crimes had been swallowed by time. And yet, the painting remained. The canvas depicting Henry, labeled number 13, the one who got away, had miraculously survived the fire. Forensic experts confirmed that it was coated in a fire-retardant chemical, one not commercially available. It was meant to survive. It was her message. Henry couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still. He kept the painting locked in evidence, but each night he returned to it like an addict. The way his eyes were painted hollow. Haunted wasn't how he felt, but how he might look after seeing what he'd seen. Then came the delivery. A plain envelope, no return address, slid under his apartment door. Inside, a Polaroid. It showed Henry sleeping in his bed from across the room. A timestamp marked it as being taken at 3:13 a.m. the night before. Beneath the photo, scrawled in looping script, "The watcher belongs in the gallery." Henry's blood ran cold. She was still out there. He contacted Interpol, requested a full protection detail, and pushed to reopen the case under international jurisdiction. The Parisian department reluctantly agreed. He was given 72 hours to gather new leads. That night, he drove to the outskirts of the city to the home of Margot Lefebvre, a once renowned forensic artist now living in seclusion. It was Margot who had created the preliminary sketches for some of the older missing persons tied to room 313. And Margot who, years ago, had been fired after claiming that her reference photos came to her in dreams. She greeted Henry at the door with cautious curiosity. "I was wondering when someone would come." He showed her the Polaroid. She didn't flinch. "She watches those who see her," Margot said quietly. "It's how she chooses her next subject." Henry asked if Margot could recognize the style of the painting, whether it truly belonged to Colette. Margot said no. "It's not her hand anymore," she whispered. "Colette. She started the collection, yes. But she's just a vessel now. The brush moves, but not by her will." Henry pressed for answers, frustrated. "What are you saying? That she's possessed?" Margot shook her head. "No, worse." She volunteered. She led Henry into her studio. Dozens of unfinished canvases leaned against the walls, most blank, others with half-formed faces. In the corner, draped in black cloth, stood her most recent piece. "I never showed this to the police," she said. "They wouldn't believe me." She pulled the cloth away. Henry gasped. The painting showed room 313, burning the exact moment the flare ignited the chemicals. But it had been painted before the fire, dated 3 weeks prior. In the corner of the scene, behind the flames, stood a faint outline, a tall figure in red, hands outstretched, smiling. It wasn't Colette. Not entirely. Its face was shifting, blurred, as though the canvas couldn't commit to one expression. Margot whispered, "She's growing. With each death, she becomes more than herself." Henry noticed something else. Hidden in the brush strokes beside the figure was another canvas, a painting within the painting. Zooming in, squinting, he realized what it showed. A future scene. It was Margot's studio, and he was in it, dead. Henry turned to Margot. "Who else have you shown this to?" "No one." "Burn it. Now." Before she sees it, Margot hesitated just long enough for the lights to flicker. Outside, the street lamp shattered. Inside, every canvas in the room twitched as if caught in a breeze that wasn't there. Henry drew his sidearm. Too late. From the hallway behind them came a sound, soft, deliberate footsteps. And then, a voice. "You should have stayed in the fire, Henry." Henry turned toward the hallway, gun raised. The footsteps had stopped, but the presence lingered, thick as smoke. Behind him, Margot whispered prayers in a dialect Henry couldn't place, her fingers trembling over the edge of her altar of paintbrushes. But nothing came through the doorway. Nothing he could see. Just a smell. Familiar. The same sickly sweetness from room 313. Henry backed toward the window, nudging Margot to move. "We leave now," he said, voice tight. She nodded, grabbing a small silver pendant from her desk. As they moved, every painting in the room began to hum, a low, vibrating resonance as though the air itself had turned against them. Then, from the largest canvas, the one of the fire, a voice echoed. Not from the hallway, from the painting itself. "You're the only one who escaped me, Henry. And I can't allow that." It was Colette's voice, but older, hollowed out. Something was wearing her like a mask. The figure within the painting blurred, flaming, feminine, moved. Its head turned to face him. The canvas didn't shift, but the shape inside did. Henry fired. The bullet shattered the canvas. The humming stopped for a second, and then every painting in the room exploded outward in a cyclone of ash and color. They escaped through the alley behind Margot's flat. Henry dragged her into the car, and they drove toward the city's edge, heading toward an abandoned art museum outside Montreal. It was the last place linked to Colette before her disappearance in 1991. On the way, Margot spoke through gritted teeth. "She's not human anymore. She was once an artist who obsessed over legacy. Now she's become a parasite. Her work consumes life to sustain itself." Henry clenched the wheel. "How do we stop her?" "You can't kill the painter," Margot whispered. "You have to destroy her canvas." Henry remembered the gallery under room 313. The rows of preserved faces, The artifacts, each one meticulously tagged, displayed, worshipped. What if her real canvas isn't physical? He asked. What if it's people? Margot looked at him with terror. Then she'll keep painting forever. The museum was a skeleton of marble and vines, closed since 2002 after a gas explosion gutted the West Wing. Henry had only read about it in archival reports. An exhibit called The Body Eternal had drawn controversy before the blast. Colette Vassar was listed among the exhibit's artists, but no work under her name was ever recovered. Inside, flashlights barely pierced the dust. Henry stepped over shattered glass, weaving past deformed sculptures and walls painted with rot. At the heart of the building was a sealed atrium, and in it, a locked vault door. Police tape from decades ago still clung to its rusted hinges. Margot pointed. There. That's where she began the transformation. Henry's badge still carried override access. He keyed in the emergency code and pulled the lever. The vault hissed open. The stench hit first. Then the heat dry, oppressive, like stepping into a kiln. Inside was a circular chamber, lit by phosphorescent green panels. On the walls were paintings, hundreds of them some abstract, others disturbingly lifelike. But all of them watched. At the center stood an easel, and on it, a canvas still wet. Henry stepped closer. It was a painting of him standing right there, in that room, looking at a painting of himself. It updated in real time. He moved. The version on the canvas moved, then blinked. Henry's knees weakened. Margot touched his arm. If this is her nexus, then this is where we burn her memory out. She pulled a flask from her coat and splashed its contents onto the painting. It sizzled, but didn't burn. Henry threw his lighter at it. It flared and was immediately extinguished by a wind that shouldn't exist underground. From behind them, a figure entered. Red dress, bare feet, eyes black like voids. Colette, or what remained of her. Skin stretched tight, veins like wires. Her face a mask of what it once was. You misunderstand, she said calmly. You think this is about me, about art, about murder. Her voice fractured like 5 people speaking at once. This is about becoming more than flesh, about eternity. Henry raised his gun. You want immortality? You'll get a tomb. He fired. The bullet struck her chest and passed through her like smoke. She lunged. Margot screamed. What followed was chaos. Henry tackling her back, Margot tossing the rest of the flask's contents into the air, flames igniting in waves across the chamber. Paintings shrieked, actual voices pouring from their frames. The vault shook. Henry dragged Margot to the exit as the easel cracked in half. But before the flames swallowed everything, he turned back. Colette was standing still in the fire, smiling, and behind her, on the wet canvas, a new figure had appeared. Not Henry, Margot, and beneath it, the words, Number 14, the archivist. Outside, gasping, Henry stared back at the collapsing atrium. There were no sirens. No one saw what happened, as though it all took place outside of time. Margot, burned and shaken, whispered, It's not over. Henry nodded. He knew what he had to do next. Henry sat alone at the very edge of the Seine, watching the water as the city moved around him, oblivious, uncaring. Paris hadn't changed. People still laughed. Cars still honked. But Henry had seen behind the curtain now. He knew something ancient had bled into the cracks of the real world, and it had a name. Colette Vassar. Room 313. Art that fed on memory, that ate identity, that watched. Margot had gone dark since the museum fire. Henry wasn't sure if she had vanished, died, or simply disappeared in the way Colette's victims always did, swallowed by a story too heavy to carry. Her name never came up in police reports. No trace of her at the hospital. It was as though she had never existed outside that vault. But Henry remembered her, and that meant something. If memory was the battlefield, then his will was the last line of defense. He returned to the motel one last time. Room 313 had been sealed. The entire building condemned after the anonymous tip Henry had submitted. But tonight, he broke in alone. Not as an officer, not as an investigator, but as a man looking for closure. The hallway smelled the same. Damp wood, mildew, and that sickly sweet perfume. Faint now, like an echo. He stood outside the door. Room 313. The brass numbers had been scratched into the wood, deep gouges like claw marks. The door wasn't locked. Henry stepped inside. Nothing had changed. Same bed, same blood-stained lamp. The walls still held faint outlines of paintings once mounted. But now the space felt hollow, like a stage after a performance, waiting for the next act. Henry moved toward the mirror. That's where it had started. But this time, instead of a reflection, the glass showed a painting, a new one. Unfinished. Just broad strokes. But unmistakably him. Not the Henry from before. This Henry. Tired. Haunted. And behind him in the painting, a woman. Margot. She stood at his shoulder in the painting, her eyes closed, a brush in her hand. Henry turned, heart racing. No one was behind him. But when he looked back, the painting had changed. Margot's eyes were open, and she was smiling. Suddenly the floor groaned. The air thickened. The walls breathed. Henry stumbled back, pulling his lighter, flicking the flame on. "I know what you are," he said to the mirror. "I'm not afraid anymore." From the corner of the room, the wallpaper peeled away like skin. A hand emerged, pale, black-nailed, paint-smeared. It reached toward the canvas. Not Henry's canvas. The room's. The space was the artwork. The murder. The memory. Henry realized then, Colette hadn't just made art. She'd made environments, installations, rooms that fed on fear, emotions sealed in architecture, and he had walked straight back into her masterpiece. But he had brought something with him. From inside his coat, Henry pulled a small silver pendant, the one Margot had left behind. It glowed faintly in his palm, warm. He pressed it to the mirror. The glass screamed. The painting melted. And from within the wall, something shrieked. 1,000 voices crying out in languages Henry didn't know but understood all the same. Pain, hunger, desperation. He stepped back as the floor cracked open, revealing a hollow cavity beneath the bed, a gallery. Inside were all the lost guests, their faces preserved in oil, each one labeled, numbered. But now, as the pendant's light grew, the paintings began to burn one by one, flames of pure white fire, clean and bright. Colette screamed. The room convulsed, and then quiet. Henry awoke in daylight. Room 313 was empty, clean, no mirror, no paintings, just dust and silence. He walked outside. The motel was gone, not demolished, just gone. In its place, an empty field. A man in overalls trimmed weeds near the road. Henry approached him. "What happened to the building that was here?" The man looked confused. "Ain't never been nothin' here, sir. Just grass." Henry stared at the spot where the door used to be, then walked away. 3 months later, Henry lived in the countryside now. No badge, no gun, just journals and silence. He opened one of the sketchbooks Margot had left behind. Inside, drawings of rooms, faces, fire, and a note in the back. Art remembers what people forget, but love remembers longer. Henry closed the book. Outside, wind stirred the trees, and from across the valley, faint and distant, he thought he heard someone painting.